Right, well, could you ask Mr. Goulbourne to come back in, please? Good. Ready to carry on, Mr. Goulbourne?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Goulbourne, thank you for coming back to us. Can I just pick up on one or two aspects of the evidence that you gave before the break? And the first relates to the difficulties that you said that were presented by the geography of the building relating to the position of the fire hydrants, the dry riser outlets. I use the word hydrants because it's a word you use. If I can ask you to look at your second statement, please. Don't use it here, but you use it elsewhere. But if you look at the first paragraph of that statement, you say that while I was posted to North Kensington back in 1997, I recall attending Grenfell Tower for various reasons. We would attend the usual types of calls there, such as smell of burning in the lifts, rubbish chutes alight, that type of thing. I also recall carrying out dry riser visits as well. Visits there, I think that should be, as well. My question is, in those early years when you visited the tower, do you remember noticing the location of the dry riser outlets and recording them or noting them as in the wrong place or in an inconvenient place?
Noting them, yes, because we used to do fire safety inspections called G visits, and part of those G visits were inspecting dry risers. Mm-hmm. So we would have gone to the inlet on the ground floor, we would have tested each outlet on each floor, and so I would have noted where they were, but we wouldn't have noted whether they were in the wrong place. Right. That would have been not the officer in charge if he felt something was defective. Right. And if there was an issue with the riser, then the officer in charge back then, I was a firefighter, the officer back then would have the ability to report a defect. Right. I don't recall any defects being reported.
On the night, which was, of course, 20 years later, and this may be a bit of a stretch, but did you have any recollection of a problem that you yourself personally had experienced in your early days with the dry riser outlets at Grenfell?
No.
Another thing you told us before the break was about the need to do a thorough search of the building to make sure you hadn't missed anything in terms of chutes, ducts, exit routes. At what point first was the decision made to have a thorough examination of that kind? Do you remember?
I can't. I don't know what they did before. I'm pretty sure they would have done 360s and they would have sent people around. But during my period when I had a command role, I asked for it to be done again. Right. Just for, we had such a difficult job. We just needed to see what was available to us, and that I just wanted to check we hadn't missed anything, but we hadn't.
Right. Just taking this just a little bit more slowly, can I ask you to look at High-Rise Policy 633, which was in force in June 2017, and turn please to clause 6.3. This is in tab 4 of our policies bundle. And you'll find clause or paragraph 6.3 at the bottom of page 8. I want to direct your attention to paragraph F on page 9. It begins on page 8 by saying, on arrival, and it says what the incident commander should do under 6.3. To establish effective command and control, the IC should, and then over the page at F, just carrying it through, you can see that it says establish the location and status of any fire control, fire engineering and or fixed installation systems. My question is, when you arrived at the incident, did you take any steps to find out, once you'd been briefed by Andy O'Loughlin, what the incident commander or incident commanders before him had done by way of establishing these matters?
Not between myself and Andy O'Loughlin, no.
Did you make any assumptions that this had been done, or did you make no assumption?
An expectation is an IC will check all the things that are available to them to use at their disposal.
When you decided to do it again, as you told us, who did you ask?
So when it was So the reason why I asked was because of the issues with water. So because the fire was so extensive, generally we will take a firefighting jet from 2 different floors. So you've got 2 firefighting jets. One jet you use as a firefighting jet and one jet you use as a backup jet. And generally for most compartment fires, that's more than adequate. This was beyond anything I think I would ever imagine, and 2 jets off the dry riser was going to be insufficient. We managed to get 2 more jets off the dry riser. But at that point, with 4 big water jets off of 1 single dry riser, at some point to get an adequate water supply for each jet, you're going to overrun the supply that you're getting. So what triggered us was I was trying to look for more water, and if I could get the turntable ladder up, that would give us another additional source of getting water. So that was one of the big triggers for trying to look for a different way.
That was the trigger. My question was who did you ask to do that exercise?
Gareth Cook. So
Gareth
Group
Cook.
Manager Gareth Cook
Right.
was tasked to go and see if he could get the aerial up to use it as a dry riser.
And the task was given to him, is this right, when you were on the 3rd floor at the bridgehead?
No, at the ground floor we did that.
So that was later. I see, okay. And did you task him to look inside the building or to do a 360 outside the building, or both?
Gareth Cook went outside the building. At some point, Nick Myatt did an internal search with inside the building to see if there was any other means that we could use.
And did they report back to you?
Yes, they did.
Did it? And at the moment when you asked for that to be done, you said the trigger for that decision was water supply problems. Does that mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, that that part at least of the strategy at that stage was still firefighting?
No, simultaneous action, so firefighting and search and rescue.
Still, okay. So the strategy at that stage still included firefighting, did it?
Absolutely, because the way the fire was burning across multiple floors, the only way to start to effectively try and rescue casualties was to put firefighters above fires, which is unusual for our normal tactics. We wouldn't put firefighters above the fire.
Yes.
So the only way I could physically think of a plan to do that was using SDBA crews to protect access and egress. So we put SDBA crews with firefighting jets to protect the route in and out for crews that were going above the firefighter to try and rescue.
And we'll come back. We may come back to this later, but I'm just interested in that last answer. Does that tell us that in fact you wouldn't be able to send search and rescue crews to perform that role unless they also had water?
Sorry, I don't fully understand the
Let me
question.
put the question a different way. Does that mean, from what you've told us, that you would not be able to send a search and rescue crew to respond to a particular FSG call, to a particular flat on a particular floor, unless they had water with them?
Our general procedure is that we would always send some firefighting media. We generally don't send crews with no water above a fire to go and search for people.
Right.
We generally have to protect them with a firefighting media and protect their access and egress. You could be sending them into a place where they'd never come back.
No. So, can you tell us, and this is a general question throughout the night, but did the reach of water, the ability to get water to the higher floors, did that dictate how far you could send crews up the building?
No, because we went outside of policy and put fire crews above floors without firefighting media.
Without water, right. While we're still on 633, can I just ask a related question about it? Can I ask you to look at Appendix 1, it's page 19. This is 72D, and I'm not going to ask you about 72D visits themselves, but I just want to ask you about this shopping list here. Can I take it that you're familiar with this policy, and in particular this, I call it a shopping list, but
yeah.
Perhaps that's a bit colloquial. These are the things which should be inspected by personnel on such visits. And I want to just pick out one in the middle of the list, which says floor layouts and any particular building construction features which may promote rapid or abnormal fire spread, such as sandwich panels, timber frame construction, atria, or voids. My question is, have you personally been involved in delivering or receiving or quality assuring any training relating to the risks which are posed by modern refurbishment or construction materials?
We've done several training packages over my career. Certainly one that sticks out was post the fatal fire for Fleur Lombard. She unfortunately died when she was fighting a fire because of sandwich panels. Sandwich panels can deliver extensive, quick, rapid fire spread hidden. So yes, I've done training, whether it's basically yes, we've done some form of training during my career.
Can you remember when was the fire in which Fleur Lombard
I can't remember, it was some time ago, Fleur Lombard.
And would you remember when these training packages were delivered, even roughly?
No, but in our DAMOP, there's a number of training packages in terms of firefighting, building construction, etc. that we do. I really, unless I looked at my training record, I can't remember the dates that I've certainly took part in it.
Right. And do you remember yourself having any thoughts about whether that training package or the contents of that training package was any use to the decisions you made on the night of the Grenfell Tower fire?
I would say that all the training that I've had has culminated in something that you can use operationally, so yes.
Right. Now, can I get back to where I promised you I would start after the break, which was your actual tasks on the third floor. When you got to the bridgehead when it was on the third floor, did you have a conversation with Group Manager Welch about what you should do?
Yes.
And did he give you a briefing?
He gave me an overall view of the activity that was going on the bridgehead at that point.
And can you briefly summarise that for us? What did he say to you?
He said he's committed crews. They're finding really difficult conditions. He's got multiple FSGs at the time that he was dealing with. And I started to say some of the things that I'd seen. We talked about how I could assist.
Did he ask you to do anything specifically?
No, he didn't ask me to do anything specifically.
Did you have any particular role?
So I said I'd come and I could take over the role as Search Sector Commander.
Right. And in brief terms, what would that involve?
Well,
at that time, there?
We were going to then have to decide what part of the building that I could take some command and control for and how we would split the building between us.
Did you make that decision?
No, we never got to that decision because we relocated the bridgehead.
Right, but you relocated the bridgehead, I think, some 30 to 40 minutes later. So when you first arrived at the third floor bridgehead, when it was at the third floor, this is what I'm focusing on, what was your specific role at that time?
So it took a while for me to get to Richard because there was so much going on and I had to allow some of that to play out. And then by the time we got to a brief, we had a quick overview of the incident.
Right.
And I did some supporting tasks at that point. There were some urgent pieces around passing some information to get some kit and equipment brought upstairs. I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure we needed some more bits of firefighting media, some more thermal imaging camera, and getting some messages for some crews. And he just talked about a little bit about how his structure was working. So there was a period of time when I just supported what they were doing on the third floor, and then got a brief about how we were going to make this operation work together.
Right. So would this be right, following from what you've said, that for the first period or part of the time you were at the third floor bridgehead, you were simply assisting in an assisting role, and then there came a time when you were given a specific role?
Yes.
Right. And what was that specific role?
So by the time we got to the discussing about that I was going to take over the search sector and what floors that would be, that was when the bridgehead was compromised, and we moved the bridgehead down, and then we delivered that on the ground floor, not on the third floor. Okay,
so would it follow from that actually you weren't actually given a specific task to perform while the bridgehead was on the third floor for very long before it moved?
No.
Right. How long before it moved do you think you were tasked specifically?
I mean, by the time we relocated to the ground floor, we were halfway through the brief of what we were going to do anyway. So by the time I got to the ground floor, we were in a place where we had kind of split the work and then decided to start to split the tasks of each individual to ensure that the whole plan could come together.
All right, we'll come back to that in a moment. Before we do, can I just still ask you some third floor related questions? Did Group Manager Welch, while you were on the third floor, tell you that he had a strategy in place for his operation? Did he explain the strategy to you?
He definitely explained his plan.
Which was what?
So
at that stage?
At that stage, it was literally taking FSG calls, getting them processed, and committing search and rescue and firefighting. They were committing crews to do FSG calls, and a number of crews, with my recollection, had already been committed, in addition to the firefighting crew.
Right.
But there was certainly conversations about what those conditions were like, because there was concerns about FSGs going and whether we had the water to be able to protect them against the severity of the fire. So he was doing an amazing job in a real balancing act, trying to do the FSG calls whilst we were trying to extend those firefighting jets that were off the third and the fourth floors at that point.
Now, in his statement to the inquiry, and we'll explore this with him, of course, when he comes to give evidence, he says, and it's page 6 of his statement, that you worked with his designated FSG team to brief the BA crews on safety issues and also where they would be going. Do you remember that being so?
I remember talk about FSGs, but not the detail.
Do you remember working with his designated FSG team, as he put it?
Yes, I remember working with Louisa da Silva. I remember working with Brian O'Keefe. They were, as you can imagine, inundated with work, and I just wanted to make sure and see how I could assist for a period of time.
What exactly did you do in that role, assisting Louisa and Brian?
So I asked about the process to get clarity of information from where they were getting the FSGs and how they were recording, but if I can recall, I don't think that was long. If it was more than a minute or so before we had to relocate the bridgehead. So by the time I got to that point, I don't remember recording spending much time there before we went back down to the ground floor.
I see. So your recollection is that your work on FSGs didn't occupy very long before you moved?
No.
Right. Did Group Manager Welch indicate to you whether there was any kind of prioritisation of FSG calls?
No, the FSG calls were the priority.
Yes, but among FSG calls, did you get any kind of instructional briefing from Group Manager Welch as to how, between themselves, they were being prioritised?
No, I'm not sure.
Well, let me give you an example.
Okay.
Did anybody say, or did you discover that anybody had said, well, these FSG calls must be prioritised on the basis of the nature of the occupants, elderly, children, people with mobility difficulties?
No.
You don't remember that?
FSGs were being prioritised because that's where we knew people were trapped,
Right.
and they were deploying crews to try and get those people.
Right. Do you know whether there was any system in place for deciding which ones to treat as more urgent, more pressing than others?
Yeah, at that time, no.
Right. Was there any discussion while the bridgehead was on the third floor about the need to commit EDBA specifically?
I knew they wanted to commit EDBA, but I can't recall a discussion about it.
Right. Do you remember whether there was any discussion or any system in place for deciding whether to send EDBA crews or SDBA crews to particular floors?
No, but I recall making those decisions when we reached the ground floor.
Yes, we'll come back to that. Do you know whose role it was while the bridgehead was on the third floor to decide or to make sure that you had enough EDBA resources available?
In Richard's system, I know he was working with Nick Myatt, and Nick Myatt was providing some support for him in terms of crews.
Did there ever come a time when the bridgehead was on the third floor that you ran out of EDBA wearers?
Sorry, I don't recall that.
Okay. And now you told us before that you didn't see any FSG information being written on the wall of the third floor, and we looked at that photograph. Can I just show you something else to see if it triggers a recollection, which is the forward information board. It's MET 000-18749. This is a board. I'm not sure whether it's necessarily a forward information board, but it's a board with FSG information on it. Does this look familiar to you?
Yes, it does.
Can you help me? What is it?
That is the forward information board.
It is.
FSG's on it.
And do you remember seeing this forward information board with this information on it at any point in the night?
I remember an FSG board with, it must have been that one,
Right.
because I remember that was part of the conversation about ensuring that the FSG information was transferred from the third floor back to the ground floor, and a fib board was taken down and the information transferred onto the wall.
Right.
So I would say yes, but because there was so much information, I can't guarantee it was this exact board, but by the looks of the information, then yes.
Do you think?
Looks like it.
Sorry.
But just by the looks of the information, then yes, it looks
Right.
like it was the board.
Was that information board there on the third floor when you arrived at the bridgehead?
There was a forward information board in use on the third floor.
Right. Was it this board?
I really couldn't confirm if it was this board or that board.
Just looking at the details on that, just casting your eye down the lists of flats and floors, is there any flat or floor that stands out in your memory, or which prompts a recollection of any particular FSG call?
No.
Okay.
I remember we searched an FSG flat on the third floor. I can't remember if it was flat 9. It was the last FSG that came in as we was moving the bridgehead.
Okay. We can take that down. While you were on the third floor, or while the bridgehead was on the third floor, did you have your main scheme radio with you?
Yeah, I did carry it with me.
Did you use it to communicate with the command unit at all?
No, you generally wouldn't use the main scheme radio to speak to the command unit, because that would be transmitting on Flonops 4, which is generally between control, either other assets coming or controlling the incident commander.
Right. Did you use, but let me ask you more generally, did you communicate with the command unit at all by radio while you were on the third floor?
Yes, I tried to, but the radio traffic was vast.
Which radio did you use?
Your fireground radio.
Right. Could you have used your airwave radio?
Generally, no. Generally, our policy is that we, at instance, unless you're a specific officer, so our national interagency liaison officers use their airwaves, but generally at fires we leave our airwaves and don't take them onto the fireground.
Right. We've had some evidence from Peter Johnson last week that he was confident, he said, that you were in communication with CU 8 by airwave radio. How does that stand with your recollection?
No, I wasn't. I spoke to the CU via handheld radio.
By handheld, right.
Yes, and towards the instant when we relocated to the ground floor, where radio traffic was extensive and we couldn't get through, we also used runners and also ORT, the officer review team, which was GM Mick Mulholland and GM Matt Cook. They were also relaying messages to the command unit for us.
Now, you say handheld, is that the fireground radio?
Yes.
Right. And you are in communication with the CU, just so that I'm clear, which command unit was it? Was it 7 or 8? Was it the FSG unit or was it the incident command unit?
I was speaking to the incident command. I don't recall ever speaking to the FSG unit.
Right. So do we take it from that you actually never yourself received FSG information over the radio from a command unit?
No, and I generally wouldn't want to interfere in that process because they're sending risk-critical information. So once they're designated who's going to get the FSG information, you generally, once you're happy with that process, you leave it alone to ensure it doesn't get compromised.
Okay. Now, can I then take you to your statement, the first statement, and ask you to look at page 3 and go to the bottom of the page, 6 lines up. After the reference to the sketch, you say, we had also received a call to FSG on the third floor So while the bridgehead was being located to the lobby, myself and Cookie took an enforcer, etc. When you say we received a call, do I take it from your evidence that that wasn't you personally, but somebody else at the bridgehead?
Yes.
I see. Okay. And that was while the bridgehead was being relocated from the third floor to the lobby, right? And do you remember how that FSG call, because you've referred to it specifically, do you remember how it came in, paper or radio?
No, I don't recall how it came in, but I'm pretty sure it was Louisa De Silva who called the FSG for the third floor, and we just said, as it's relocating, we will take it. Me and Gareth Cook, which I said in my statement, Gareth Cook and I took an enforcer and knocked the door down and went and searched.
Let's move to the subject then of the move of the bridgehead down to the ground floor. Now, we've had some evidence from Watch Manager O'Keefe that the movement of the bridgehead to the ground floor happened as a result of a firefighter coming onto the bridgehead and saying that the fire was around the bridgehead. Do you remember that?
No.
Right. And do you remember, this was also some evidence from Gareth Cook, that there was talk, at least, of the fire having got below the bridgehead. Do you remember that?
I don't recall that. I do recall a conversation between myself and Group Manager Welsh that the smoke condition in the bridgehead was untenable for a bridgehead and we had to relocate.
Right. So far as you're concerned, the reason for moving the bridgehead down to the ground floor was the presence of smoke at the third floor and not fire below the bridgehead?
Yes.
Right. Now, and we've just closed down the statement, but it doesn't matter. In the part of the statement I was showing you, you've exhibited a sketch, I think, of the layout of the ground floor once you move the bridgehead to the ground floor. Perhaps we'll look at that. It's MET 000015874. Is that it? That is your sketch?
Yes, it is.
Now, can we just go through this? First of all, at the top of the diagram, you've, I think, written entrance. I'm interpreting your handwriting, but is that fair?
Yes.
I don't apologise. It's pretty clear. And so, can we take it that the top of the building or the top of the diagram is the south side?
Yes.
And therefore, to the left, we've got the east, to the right, the west, and on the bottom, the north. You then mark FSG next to that entrance with a ring round it. You see?
Yes.
Is that to signify the recording of FSG information that was going on the wall on the left as you go in?
Yes, with Station Manager Pete Wolfenden.
With Station Manager Pete Wolfenden. Anybody else you recall?
There was another watch manager there.
Yes.
May have been Williams.
Yes. All right.
And Andy Walton was by that doorway.
Well, you've marked Andy Walton, as we can see, because I think the writing says Andy Walton. You say he was by that doorway. What was he doing there? Do you know?
A number of things. Probably at that time, he was organising getting some resources in. We implemented a one-way system, so by the bottom right-hand corner, it's the back door.
Yeah.
What we were doing was all the crews that were waiting in staging outside would come in via the back door, and Andy Walton was communicating with the watch manager on the other side. So when Nick Mitre needed crews, Andy Walton controlled that. But also, and more importantly, we needed to get the casualties out the short route. So when casualties were coming down the stairs, there was a casualty handling crew at the bottom of the stairs. They took the casualties through the short route, out the west way, and down to casualty clearing point.
Right. Now, we may be able to do this with a photograph. So if we can keep the diagram on the screen, please, Paul, and put up the photograph we looked at earlier this morning, INQ 322, just so we've clearly got your evidence about the short route. We can see in the photograph, 322, there it is, there's you coming in the front door, FSG on the wall, and then there's a door with a sign next to it marked Grenfell Tower Community Room. Is that the door to the short route?
No, that's the door to the back door.
That's the door to the back door. So that's where you've marked back door, is it?
Yes.
And what was the short route? Just looking back at the diagram, that the casualties were being taken out.
So the doorway that I'm walking through,
Yes.
that is the doorway straight out towards the covered walkway.
Yes.
You get to the covered walkway, turn left, walk under, and that's the casualty clearing point down there.
And what was the back door used for then?
So that was used for bringing our crews in.
I see. So
Crews coming in, crews coming out, and the territorial support group that was supporting us that night, they converged at the back door to help crews come in and out their access and egress.
I follow. So EDBA wearers and SDBA wearers, once this had come down to the ground floor, would come in through the, as it were, the back door, but casualties would go out through the front.
Yes.
That's how it worked, is it? Yeah. Now, you've got on the diagram 2 lines that run top left to bottom or mid right. And what are those?
Can I point to them? Is that
Yes.
okay? Are we talking these?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, after Gareth Crooker came back and couldn't, because of the falling debris and because of the conditions outside, we couldn't use the turntable ladder as an additional stairwell and dry riser. We needed more firefighting jets because of the severity of the fire. So I detailed Gareth to become to deliver a water officer job. And I said, unfortunately, if you can't find a dry riser to give me more water, you're going to have to run a hose from the nearest fire engine into the building and up the stairwell, which is a pretty difficult task. So they found the nearest pump to their credit, got an additional water supply from a pump outside, ran it through the back door, put a lightweight portable pump just by the exit. Because of the fumes, we couldn't have the lightweight portable pump inside. So the lightweight portable pump was left at the front door, and then they ran a hose from the lightweight portable pump, hauled it aloft up to the mezzanine floor, and then ran a hose up the internal side of the building to give extra water jets.
And do you remember roughly what time that was put in place? Was it after you came down to the ground? The bridge came down
That
to
activity
the
took place on the ground floor.
Okay. We may have an image of it. So if you could just be shown very briefly INQ 317. Is that what you are describing?
Yes.
Right. We may come back to that photograph in due course. We'll see. Continuing with your diagram, if we can. You take that photograph down. Go back to the diagram. You've got in the middle SDBA 20 against what I think we can all agree is the glass partition between the main lobby and the stairwell. What does SDBA 20 signify?
So I requested from Nick Myatt that there must be 20 wearers available at that holding area at all times.
At all times. And related to that, we have in the bottom right-hand corner of the diagram, EDBA in a ring with a 30 next to it. What does that signify?
Exactly the same brief. I want 30 EDBA wearers available at all times.
Right, I see. And were the SDBA wearers on the west side of the glass wall? Was that where the queue for them was?
Yes.
And the EDBA wearers standing where?
They were in a side room. Actually, I think that was the lift lobby. That's where they were.
Right, the lift lobby. And who was? Do you remember who was running the EDBA group?
No, so Nick Myatt.
Yes.
So where he circled, that was the single door partition between the glass partition that took you into the stairs.
Yes.
So Nick Myatt had the door, and when I required or Richard required resources, we went to Nick. And we either got our SDBA or EDBA crews.
Right. And
once it started to deplete, Nick knew to go to Andy Walton or 8 another outside to ensure that they were replenished, so we had constant crews all the time.
I see. So EDBA wearers pool there,
Yes.
SDBA wearers pool there. And going back to Andy Walton, which is where we started this, what was his job?
Andy Walton was assisting the communications between requesting from the officer outside who was holding officers to bring them in, and also assisting where we were moving casualties out.
I see. Okay. Now, Did you know or were aware of a station manager loft involved in any activity?
I know Brett Loft,
Right.
but Brett Loft, I didn't work with him within the lobby that evening. I'm pretty sure he was elsewhere doing FSGs, a command unit potentially, but
Right.
I had no direct contact with Brett that evening.
Did you know who was in charge of BA? Well, first of all, did you know by the time you got down to the ground floor, the bridgehead got down to the ground floor, that BA, something called BA main control had been set up?
Yes, I knew BA main control was set up.
Right. Did you know who was in charge of BA main control?
No, I can't remember the name of the officer.
If I suggested to you that it was Brett Loft, would that help?
It would, yeah, make sense.
Did you know of the involvement of a station manager, Kipling?
Yes, Dan Kipling.
Yes. What was he doing? Do you know?
I can't remember. I thought he was helping with FSGs on a command unit.
Right. Now, when the bridgehead came down to the ground floor, did you notice watch managers Williams and Watson there managing FSGs in the place you've indicated now by the wall on the left as you come in?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Was that the first time you noticed what they were doing?
Yes.
And did you see what they were actually doing at that stage?
Didn't know the detail. I just knew they were processing FSG calls.
Did you speak to them?
No, Richard Welsh spoke to them.
Right. So far as you know, was that the first time Richard Welch spoke to them about FSG calls?
I really couldn't say if that was the first time they spoke.
Okay. Now, in your statement at page 4, your first statement, at page 4, if you go to the second paragraph, I showed you this earlier this morning, where you say the lobby covers the ground floor and is set up as follows, and then you've got the FSG being set up to the left. You then say there's a separate room off the lobby which has a door leading to the outside of the grassed area. We've looked at that. And you then go on to say, 2 lines up from the bottom, I manned the BA board, which I positioned at the bottom of the stairs. Now, I just want to focus on that bit of your evidence, if I can. Can I ask you, first of all, just so we can work out what this involved, to look at some photographs. INQ 327, first of all. INQ 327. Now, this is a photograph or a CCTV shot taken on camera 2 with an adjusted time mark of 03:15:43. First of all, can you identify yourself in this picture?
Yes, I can.
And
I'm the one pointing.
You're the one pointing. So this is 3:15. So what is happening at this point? Can you help?
Sorry.
The next picture is at 3:28. This is taken on camera 4 with an adjusted time mark of 03:16:41. So not very long afterwards. We think we can identify you in this picture, but perhaps you can help us. Are you in this picture?
So I'm helping move one of the telemetry boards.
Yes. And where were you moving them from?
So I was just a bit concerned that I thought that area would have too much going on, and I wanted BA to be in a specific area to be able to manage the resources. So I made a decision to split where the BA entry control was and where the FSG was and where the SDBA and EDBA were pooling, because there was just too much going on in that area.
Right. Did you notice when you were doing this movement the 3 officers standing by the wall on the left by the door? We could see the 2 white helmets and the unhelmeted officer there.
Yes, I knew they were there.
You knew they were there?
Yeah.
And did you know at this point, so 3:16:41, what they were doing?
Yes,
You did.
They were processing FSG calls.
Did you actually see for yourself physically what they were doing?
Yeah, they were processing, they were writing some bits down on the walls. There were some bits of paper with FSGs that were being processed.
You saw that for yourself, did you?
Yes.
Did you see anybody bringing them pieces of paper from the outside?
No.
Did you see how they were receiving FSG information from the outside?
No.
Were they on their radios, did you see?
I really don't know.
All right.
But I know they were receiving information, and that was the key part.
All right. Then if we go to the next picture, which is 329, this is an adjusted timestamp camera 2 at 3:16:48. This appears to show you setting up the entry control board at the bottom of the stairs, the main stairs. Can you confirm that's you, first of all?
Yes, it is me.
Okay. And is that what you're referring to?
Yes, it's nice and clear. They were in a place of peace. The entry control and managing BA crews is a risk-critical task for us, and I wanted them to be in a place where they could operate effectively.
Right.
And also, it just reduces the distance. They were at the bottom of the stairs,
Right.
because also what was going to be really key was not only the information we were getting from FSGs, but what was the information we were getting from crews as they were returning back at the bottom of the stairs.
Yes. Now, just taking this a little bit more slowly, was it your decision to separate physically the FSG information you could see being received and recorded on the wall on the left of the lobby, on the one hand, and on the other, the operation of the entry control boards on the other?
Yes.
Did you think at the time that you made that decision that that might create a risk of miscommunication, that physical distance?
No, I was more concerned that there was too much going on for the BA to be effective. So you had a number of risk-critical elements that were right on top of each other at that point, just because, including the number of resources that are having to be pulled to be deployed, and they needed to be some sort of separation. The distance wasn't that great, and the key was ensuring that the information got passed over,
Yes.
which it did.
Okay. The key was ensuring that information got passed over. Did you think, however, that the presence of a glass wall and a doorway, might create a barrier between the FSG information coming into the tower and being recorded by the watch managers at the wall and the entry control board operation?
No, door was open, and it allowed the entry control to operate as well.
Now, just following up on the last answer but one, you say the information got passed over. Can you, once the board, the bridgehead came down to the ground floor, could you describe for us how that information went from the watch managers operating the FSGs by the wall to the bridgehead?
Yeah, so initially FSGs were deploying crews to BA crews. Initially they were on the ground floor.
Right.
The FSGs were doing the right thing. They were trying to prioritise, but they weren't getting the picture of what the conditions were and where we put in firefighting jets to do the rescues. My view was in my tactical plan was that if the entry control and the FSGs and all the firefighters are there in one place, you end up having people with really important roles but doing other people's roles, and it cross-pollinates too much. And what it really needed at that point was people with specific tasks to focus on those specific tasks to be part of that plan. So the reason why I moved it is so FSGs could focus on getting clarity of FSG calls and bring them to the entry control who would log them. Because there were so many FSG calls at that point, I moved to systematic searching to get each FSG, because the conditions were very poor. And what it then meant is because the FSGs were so sporadic that you could deploy a BA crew to an FSG to the 15th floor, and then a second later an FSG coming for the 8th floor. That means you're walking BA crews past FSGs. If we weren't methodical enough, we would have been missing people. And it was clear from the information that was coming back that those people tasked, certainly for upper floors, were not making the upper floors because they were coming across casualties and coming back.
Right. So, at the start of the operation of the bridgehead at the ground floor, who was actually tasking the crews with FSG information and destinations?
So originally when the bridgehead got moved back down, Pete Wolfenden, and I'm speaking with Richard Welsh, tasked some BA crews to deploy to FSG calls.
And how was that done in terms of providing information to crews? Did Pete Wolfenden give crews pieces of paper?
I don't know. I know they were briefed with FSGs and then deployed.
Did you, at that time, where were you standing when that was happening?
I think at that point that was when you saw me just organising the ground floor, and then I had a conversation or a briefing with Richard Welsh, deciding on what that looked like. Because what it really meant was we'd only extended jets to so far, and where the fire now was pretty much from the sixth floor onwards, really taking a hold across the floors. It meant that those firefighters going up to those FSG calls were going without firefighting media, and there was a view that, knowing that the conditions and the information that we were getting back from those crews, is if we didn't put some sort of control to protect their egress, we could have deployed them, and they may have got into difficulty.
When you made the decision to change the system so as to make it more systematic, could you just tell us what change did you make?
Yeah. So at that period, Pete was absolutely right to deploy those crews, but as conditions change, the tactics have to change. So what that then meant is it's probably easy with that sketch that I drew. You had your pool of SDBA and your pool of EDBA crews. SDBA were going to work up to the 10th floor. They were going to do search and rescue on the floors that we hadn't cleared, but they were also going to protect the access and egress, because we were still getting multiple FSGs. There were certainly a couple of floors, and I think I've mentioned the 16th and 18th floor, where we knew information that some of the flats had residents had pulled into, and we were trying to get to those floors where we knew there was many casualties. But I had to put a plan in place that EDBA could go and rescue them, and a way to ensure that we protected the rescue and protected them coming back out. So we were pushing EDBA crews up as high as we could, as far as they could get. So probably need to put some clarity over the answer I've just given you. So what that meant in terms of process was Pete Wolfenden's job changed to focus on FSGs, pass that over to where Louisa De Silva and Brian O'Keefe were working on the board. Nick Myatt was delivering those crews, and then myself and Richard Welsh were deploying crews. And what we would do is we would look at the floors that we needed to get to, brief those crews, and then Louisa De Silva and Brian O'Keefe, BA Control, would tell the crews what FSGs were on the floor they were going to. And their view was to get all the FSGs off of that floor, because we had to ensure that we were firefighting and doing search and rescue, but doing it in a really methodical way.
Well, I'm going to unpack that. It's a long answer and there's a lot in it.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm going to unpack it slowly with you if I can. But the first question is, how long after the bridgehead moved down to the ground floor did you make the decision to change the approach to FSG?
I don't really recall how long, but it was based on information that we were getting from the BA crews. And information that myself and Richard had got ourselves. We, as commanders, went up, and crews were telling us that the conditions were pretty unbearable. Certainly information that we'd got from crews near the 9th floor, that it was white hot and you can't get past it. So, at times we went and checked.
Right. Okay, well, again, we'll come back to that. My next question is, did you tell Watch Manager Williams and Watch Manager Watson that you'd made a change to the way in which BA wearers were going to be deployed?
No, I didn't, but Richard Welsh did.
Right.
And that was a conversation that me and Richard Welsh, and Richard said, I'll go and do it.
Okay, so we will come back to that. Now, let's just take this in stages if I can. First of all, once the bridgehead moved down to the ground floor, can you explain how your role related to Louisa De Silva's role, who was recording FSG information on the green wall?
I had control with Richard over the deployment and decisions of where crews were going to go. Part of that was Louisa was collating the FSG information from FSG, and between herself and Brian O'Keefe, I asked them I'll designate a floor for a BA crew to go to, and they would tell them all the FSGs on that floor. Also, Louisa would be debriefing the crews as they come back to ensure that all the tasks were being done. So as we deployed them to a floor, they could check off the flat numbers they'd been to, and we could tick them off of our list. And I think you can see on the list, you start to see some crosses go through as we started to work our way through it.
And what information did you have when you decided which floor to send crews to?
Part of that was from the information from crews when they debriefed us. So if they'd gone to the 6th floor, which some crews did, and they said, we've gone in, the fire's still burning, but we've checked all the floors and it's now clear, then that enabled you to focus on the other floors.
And to what extent did you rely on information still coming from the wall, as it were, through Pete Wolfenden on pieces of paper?
Oh, absolutely, because that's telling you where the people are and the FSGs are.
I see.
And that was the difficult part that the EDBA crews had and the SDBA crews. So even though we were methodical, we pushed EDBA crews as hard as we could. And part of that was saying to the EDBA crews, we've got multiple people trapped on upper floors. I'm really sorry, but it is what it is tonight. We're going to protect you. Practical firefighting is going to keep you alive, but you're going to have to go above the fire floor. We're going to push you as hard as you can go, and none of them turned their back on that. So we pushed EDBA crews up as hard as we could get. But certainly at the start, the 7th wasn't great, the 8th was bad, and they were telling me in the early stages that the 9th was just unpassable at that point. And we knew we had to do some work on the 9th to then push on to try and get to those casualties on the upper floors.
Yeah. Well, again, we'll come back to that. Just taking this in stages. Operationally, were you physically taking firefighter tallies off firefighters?
Oh, no.
Who was doing that?
Louisa and Brian.
Now, in your statement, on page 4 of your statement, you refer 2 lines up from the bottom to running an FIB. You say, as part of my remit, I also ran an FIB, Forward Information Board. Louisa Bryan ran this for me. I mean, that's clearly Louisa and Brian. Yeah. This was so I could note the location of the FSGs and where people were trapped, what floors, flat numbers, and who was allocated and so on, and so that when people were rescued and crews were out, I could mark it on the board. As the FIB, and you go on, as the FIB was not big enough to cope with the volume of FSGs coming in, I decided to utilise the wall so I could clearly see who was allocated, where the FSGs were and who had been brought out. Just on all of that, we may be able to mark a time for that. Can I show you a photograph, INQ 330?
Yeah, I think when I've said I think that's kind of the royal we.
Yes.
As the kind of team bit, because I certainly weren't marking it on the wall. That was Louisa and Brian.
Well, I was going to ask you that. But to just go to this photograph, INQ 330, we can see this is camera 2 with an adjusted time of 3:23:39. I think that's you in the centre of the picture.
Yes.
And you're talking, that we think is Louisa on the left and,
that is Louisa.
and Brian O'Keefe on the right. Is this before information started being written on the wall? Do you remember?
No, I think information was written on the wall at that point. We had the BA boards in the bottom corner.
Yes. I see.
I think we also probably had a couple of crews at that point that had come down in a pretty exhausted state, and we were putting them around the corner trying to give them rehab.
I see. Is that what's happening on the left-hand side of the picture?
I would have thought so, potentially.
And we can see Richard Welch, I think, on the right there, in the white helmet.
Yes.
Yes. Was the bridgehead in operation at this point? Were those boards, the entry control boards there we see on the left, actually live?
The bridgehead was in operation as soon as we got to the ground floor. That was the point we were deploying crews.
Right. And then, as I've said to you, the FIB wasn't big enough to cope, so you used the wall. Did you personally write on the wall?
No, that was Louisa and Brian.
Right. Was anybody else writing on the wall apart from Louisa and Brian?
Yes, and I've just forgotten his name. He was here before me. It's really bad. He was doing comms. Comms operator was Michael. I think
Morrison.
Morrison. That's it.
Right.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. If I was to ask you some questions about who wrote what on the wall, would you be able to help?
I'm sorry, no.
And that will save some time, I suspect. Do you recall whether the FSG information on the ground floor wall was put onto the walls only after you and the rest of the Bridgehead team had moved down, or was there some on the wall when you got there? By which I mean the wall opposite the stairs, the green wall.
Louisa De Silva and Brian came down, and they were always going to transfer that information, and they were down before us, and they worked really hard that night. So I'd be shocked if they hadn't already started transferring that information onto the wall.
Yes. Okay. Are you familiar with the handwriting of the wall handwriting of particular people who are writing on the wall? Let me try one thing. I'm at risk of taking too long with it. MET 000158816. Are you able to identify who wrote any of that up there?
Sorry, no.
You're not. All right. Now, you can take that down. Do you remember, once the Bridgehead had started operating on the ground floor, how FSG information was physically coming in to the Bridgehead space?
Some was. Most of it was coming in via face-to-face, but they were being left also with a physical piece of paper.
They would have been left. Who would have been left?
So information was being passed from the watch manager was coming over sometimes, Williams, and they were making contact with Mr. Morrison, Louisa, or Brian, and ensuring that transfer.
Okay. And do you remember which watch managers it was who was bringing pieces of paper into the Bridgehead?
No, I don't. I think there was a few of them. A few people were doing it.
Right. And were they the same watch managers who were managing or running the FSGs by the wall?
Yes,
in the main lobby.
Yes,
right.
But at some point they probably may have asked someone a favour to run it over. So.
Right. Okay. Can I? Yes. Is I think now a convenient moment for a break for you?
Yes, please.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I think the witness has had an hour of me.
Well,
that's probably enough.
Yes, and you're making quite good progress,
yes.
aren't you?
Yes, very much.
So we could have certainly afforded to have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yes. We'll have a 10-minute break, Mr. Goulbourne. Again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room. And we'll resume at 3:10.
Thank you.
Right? Thank you very much. 3:10 then, please. Yes, Mr. Millett. Yes. Our break seems to have got a little extended.
I'm not sure that
Should we have Mr. Goulbourne back?
I hope the French listeners can answer you, and I'm sure it will.
Yes, let's have Mr. Goulbourne back.
Well, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting, Mr. Goulbourne, but we are now ready to go on.
Thank you.
Mr. Goulbourne, thank you for coming back. When you started operating the bridgehead on the ground floor, who was ultimately responsible for deployments of BA wearers?
I was with Richard Welsh.
Right, you were with him. Who was the ultimate decision maker between you two, or did you agree everything?
No, we didn't agree with everything. We just worked together and spoke together about what crews we were deploying.
Right. And you told us earlier that the information you used was a combination, I think, of information from debriefs from crews arriving from within the building and information coming to you from the wall, if I can put it that way, in the lobby.
Yes.
Now, the way in which information came to you from the lobby was chits of paper. Did that continue to be the case throughout the time that you were operating on the ground, the bridgehead on the ground floor?
Yes, information kept on coming from FSG. Obviously, some of that information was face-to-face, where people were passing them over, but they'd be backed up by almost a hard copy.
And did you sometimes send EDBA wearers or SDBA wearers to different flats or floors than were marked on the chits of paper?
Did I send EDBA wearers to different floors marked
Yes.
on the sheet? I sent them to a number of floors, so yes, I would do.
Right. Now, turning then to this question of the change in strategy to a systematic search, you say in your statement, just to anchor it somewhere, and this is page 4, 5th paragraph, first line, you say, as we were getting notified of FSGs on every floor, I decided on systematic searching and which floors to commit crews to at any given time. At what point did you make that decision?
I can't remember the exact time. It felt fairly quickly after we moved to the ground floor, but I really couldn't exactly tell you the time.
Right. Now, the first deployment of EDBA crews after the move of the bridgehead to the ground floor, we have at about 3:29. Would that be right?
Yeah, sounds right.
Right. Now, did you, when you made your decision as to where to send the crews to, did you select the floors in a particular order?
So for SDBA crews, yes. So they were starting off at the first floor of fire that we had left to start knocking it down. But I was deploying multiple crews. So some crews had firefighting in the floors, but some crews had protecting the escape route. And we pushed the EDBA crews as high as we could.
How high was that?
So initially, the EDBA crews couldn't get as far as the 9th, but after some firefighting, they pushed on to the 10th, the 11th, up to the 12th and 13th at some point.
Right. Did you know, well, let me ask you this. Let me ask it in an open way. Did you know where the FSG floors were? Let me put it a different way. Was there a limit to below which there were no FSG calls?
We had a list of all of the FSG calls, and we were systematically working our way through to get all of those FSGs.
Right. Did you know that once the bridgehead had moved down to the ground floor, the only active FSG calls were for the 11th floor and above?
At some point, I knew, because we were clearing those floors, and also I knew at some point during the evening we had information that all of the FSGs had stopped.
When the bridgehead moved down to the ground floor and started operating there, what would you do with a chit that said 18th floor, for example?
We would hold the chit for the 18th floor because we knew that we had crews working, depending on what time of the night that was. We knew that the 18th floor was a priority because there was an FSG, but we also knew that crews couldn't get that far. So we'd always had that group of EDBA wearers of 30, so I knew there was crews that we could send there, but we had to do some work to get them there.
Do you know from recollection what the highest floor, I think you mentioned 13th, but what the highest floor was to where you sent an EDBA crew?
Yes. So during parts of the night, I was really fortunate. I knew a lot of the crews there personally. I knew it needed experienced firefighters to take some additional risks on the additional risks that we're already taking. So a few crews that I knew, one from East Ham. I asked them a specific task, and I just asked them to push and take as much risk as you can and let me know how far you can get. And they came back down the stairs in a pretty difficult state and said that unless I win the fight on the 11th floor, they pushed onto the 13th, ducked into the 14th for a time, and they said they were on the edge, and they said if you don't fix the 11th floor, then everyone will die in terms of firefighters coming back unless you fix that.
Right. And do you remember at least roughly how soon that was after you started operating the bridgehead on the ground floor?
I couldn't recall, but I pushed EDBA crews at fairly regular intervals we were getting decent updates back from the crews that we were sending to the worst points. After we won the fight on the 9th floor, we were pushing hard on the 10th and 11th.
Right.
The crews were coming back. The 11th, they were saying the 11th was just white hot. Everything was alight. They were getting to the stairwell, trying to get into the lobby. It was a fight just to get into the lobby.
Right.
In the meantime, they were trying to work out a system, and the system was working. There were a couple of crews that were amazing for me that weren't in BA. They were from Whitechapel and Shoreditch, who were just helping with hose and helping with casualties. But what we had to do is, because we still had residual fire in some of the floors, and it's kind of hard to explain, but because we were pushing crews into some of the lower floors, it would then compromise the stairwell where the EDBA crews were. Anybody on the stairwell would have to be on their bellies because it would be too ferocious in there. Anytime they had a casualty, the comms had to be pretty good, and the system was good that they were speaking to each other, shutting the door, clearing the stairwell, bringing people down. I know I've just painted a really complicated picture. We were having discussions. What we didn't want to do is be trying to fight the fire into floors, but then compromising the only escape route that we had because we had one stairwell.
Okay.
I kind of hope that complicated way makes sense.
Just focusing on the communications about FSG, if you did get at the bridgehead a chit or other information of an FSG call above the 11th floor, but couldn't get above the 11th floor, would you, or did you tell Watson or Williams or Wolfenden that a deployment to that floor couldn't be made?
No, we kept the FSG live on the board by the entry control, but I didn't tell Watson and Wolfenden, and probably in hindsight that should have gone back to them, but we were just so busy, we were focusing on trying to get those people, crews to those floors.
Were you able to communicate with either the command unit or the control room about the inability to respond to FSG calls above a particular floor at any point?
Yes, so the ORT officers were doing lots of running for us and trying to get messages away, and also the operations commander at that point was Andy O'Loughlin, so he was coming in at regular intervals to get briefings on how the progress was going. The incident commander at that point was Andy Rowe, along with the commissioner, who came in to get briefings for updates. So not specifically to the CU, but certainly to the command chain. They knew where we were going, they knew the plan, but also they knew the difficulties that we were facing.
Do you recall a heated or emotional or passionate, forget the adjective, but you get the sense, do you recall a discussion of that nature involving Watch Manager Williams and Watch Manager Wolfenden and Group Manager Welch about the subject, about why it was that FSG calls above certain floors were not being responded to?
Yes, myself and Richard spoke about that, and yes, they did have a fairly heated conversation, but these are passionate officers in a really difficult day. It's not unusual and not unexpected. We're all professional officers that are trying to do our best. So we had no problem with having difficult conversations, but ultimately I and Richard had to make command decisions on the information that we had.
Just trying to pinpoint that in terms of timing. Can you be shown a picture, which is INQ 332? This is camera 2 adjusted time at 3:40:20, so half an hour or less after the bridgehead came down to the ground floor. And it shows Louisa da Silva, I think, on the bottom left, and then 3 officers on the right. Can you identify them?
I can see me and Richard, but I don't know who we're speaking to.
Right. We think that's Watch Manager Williams, and we've got a relatively reliable identification of him. Do you remember this discussion, this 3-way discussion, at about this point?
No, I don't remember the discussion.
Can you turn to the next picture, which is taken at 6 seconds later, 3:33. Again, can you identify the people on the right-hand side of the picture? There's you, I think, and Louisa. We can get that far. And we think that's Watch Manager Williams.
Yeah, I still can't. No, sorry.
Okay. And then at 3:34, which is an adjusted time of 3:03:41:04, showing Watch Manager Williams, I think we note him, talking to Louisa da Silva. And you, I think, are in the background on the right. Do you remember that incident or that discussion?
No.
Right.
But myself and Richard and I was really clear. We had information about where the firefighting and the protection was for those crews.
Yes.
We also had the information that was coming back from those crews. The FSGs didn't, but the FSGs were performing a really single function, and that's how we split the room up to ensure that people could focus on specific tasks to make sure that we had complete clarity. And if that was a conversation, I have no doubt that's what I was saying.
Right. So just finishing up with this line, does this help us or does this not help us identify the timing of what we've called the heated discussion, but the discussion about matching up FSGs?
It looks that way. So,
well,
yeah.
One can. Does it trigger a recollection? That's really my question.
I absolutely remember having a conversation with Richard that we've agreed and we're going to transition. That's the best tactic forward, and that FSGs shouldn't be deploying BA crews on their own, because the only way they could do that was to deploy them without the firefighting media and without knowledge of what was coming back, and that was really clear.
And using these pictures and the timings, does that help us recall how long after the bridgehead came down to the ground floor that discussion took place?
Yeah, I'd agree.
Well, I don't want to push you into agreeing for the sake of it. I mean, does it match your recollection?
I do recall having I do recall having the conversation with Richard about that very detail. Right. So that does bring that back to me that Mr. Williams was there.
In relation to this point specifically, and just pursuing it, after that discussion, was it your impression that the officers on the other side of the glass partition, Williams and Watson, at least Williams for a time being, were continuing to allocate specific FSGs to firefighters as they went past, and then firefighters were given different briefings by you and Group Manager Welch when they got to the bridgehead on the other side of the glass wall?
No, but we asked for that to stop. But I didn't expect that to continue. And Nick Myatt was ensuring that no BA crews with anything but specific briefings were going past that door. Right.
We have some evidence that a crew manager Main, who had a buddy called Lundqvist, tallied out at 3:29, and he says he was initially tasked by a senior officer to go to flat 113 in response to an FSG call, but he then said that he was retasked by you to go to floor 4 and firefight. Does that trigger a recollection?
If it's an SDBA crew, then yes, I deployed SDBA crews. SDBA crews at that point were protecting access and egress and firefighting on lower floors. So if someone had given them a different brief, then yes, I would have rebriefed them. because that wasn't in the plan. The plan was that we were ensuring that EDBA crews, that we were starting to make progress, but progress meant travel distance, and travel distance meant I needed to put EDBA crews to ensure we were getting the crews with the longest duration to start to make that travel distance, and SDBA crews were supporting that on the lower floors.
Right. In fact, I've put this to you on the basis that it's Main and Lundqvist, and indeed it was them. Does this help? They were a Battersea crew wearing EDBA and not SDBA. So just to repeat the question, do you remember retasking an EDBA crew from Battersea who had originally been tasked to go to floor 113 with a new task to go to floor 4 and firefight?
No.
You don't remember that?
No, I specifically would not have put an EDBA crew to the 4th floor. Right.
Okay. Okay. So does that follow from that when EDB So what would you do with EDBA crews? Would you call them off in response to particular FSG calls and ask them to go as high as they could towards it, or would you just take an EDBA crew as it presented itself?
So when we were deploying, when I was deploying EDBA crews, it was to upper floors and to go to FSGs on those floors. What I hadn't done is I hadn't deployed crews above the floors where we were having difficulty getting past, because there was no point. I would just make the stairwell congested.
Right.
In regards to the lower floors, the full floor at that point of the operation, even though the fire was of origin there, it wasn't giving us any issue. So I wouldn't have deployed anybody there because all the activity was on floors above the 4th.
Now, just pursuing that answer a bit further and anchoring it in your statement, if you go to page 5 of your statement and look at the 3rd paragraph on that page, please, you will see that you say, after having described the decision to put crews of 4 in SDBA to fight the fire on 4th and 5th floors, you then go on to say, this enabled me to push EDBA crews through to work the floors above the fire to the lowest floors where FSGs had been identified. This strategy was outside policy. It was purely practical firefighting. And that is essentially what you've told us earlier today. I just want to focus on which floors we're talking about. Which were the lowest floors where FSGs had been identified?
At that point, I can't remember which, at that point of the incident. I mean, the lowest floor that we had in FSG was the 3rd floor, which I searched with Gareth Cook very early on in the incident. There were FSGs on a number of lower floors, but they were starting to be cleared relatively quickly as EDBA crews were pushing on.
Right.
So in terms of the timeline of the incident, I'm kind of unsure. I'm sorry.
During the time that you were responsible for, or assisting with, deployments in response to FSGs at the bridgehead, what was the highest floor to which you recall sending an EDBA crew in response to an FSG call?
Once we've gone to systematic searching, I think probably the 14th.
Do you have a recollection of that?
I remember sending a crew to the 14th, yeah. Or that's when I asked them to go as far as you can. So it's back to my earlier statement where I was told that the 11th is bad beyond belief. And I asked the crew that we had mountain FSGs still that were live, and there were a number of floors that were particularly have stayed with me. One was on the 16th floor, one was on the 18th floor, and I was desperate to get crews there. I mean, desperate to get crews there.
Do you remember the flat number on the 16th floor?
I really don't. I remember the flat numbers, but as time's gone on, I've kind of forgot those. But I knew the floors, and I knew they were dotted around the building, but those in particular because the information we were getting that there was multiple people in specific flats on those floors. But we knew until we managed to get crews to be able to get that far and to get water, we were struggling to get to them. So we were pushing them, deploying as many crews as we could to try and resolve that, to enable them to get further. The bit that you struggle with is if you then deploy a crew and you get a firefighter emergency and you lose a crew, it then suddenly diverts your firefighting effort to go and find those firefighters. So we needed to keep that rescue operation as continuous as we could and really push hard to go to those upper floors.
Just focusing on the 3 floors you've referred to above the 11th, you said 14th, 16th and 18th. You said the highest, I think you said the highest floor to which you recall deploying an EDBA crew was the 14th. First of all,
at that point.
At that point, which point are you talking about?
So I think we're at a stage of the incident where I'm still working. SDBA crews were working pretty much at some point up to the 10th. Because as we started to win the floors, it started to become a little bit easier. We were able to reposition some of the hoses out of the dry risers then to upper floors, which then allowed us to extend a little bit higher. But pushing on that, there were specific crews that I had asked to push on past the 11th, really outside of where they were to see how far they could get, and they were saying they got to the 13th, top of the 14th, but couldn't get any further. Later on in the incident, when they started to win the fight for the 11th, were able to push on further.
And do you recall which station the crew you deployed to the 14th floor came from?
The first one was East Ham, Foxtrot 44.
East Ham. And how many? 4?
I think I sent in a crew of 5.
And how far did they get?
They got to so they pushed on past the 11th, got to the 12th, did a cursory search, raced to the 13th, they said, and then on the 13th, in the stairwell, you do kind of 5 steps, then you do a kind of mezzanine, and at that point they were pretty beat up, and they felt they would not have got back. So they told me there were some casualties, which we knew later on. There was some casualties in the lobby or the 13th floor, but they were clearly deceased. And they come back and gave me that information.
We've got a deployment of a crew of 5 from East Ham to the after 7 a.m., which is quite late into the incident. Does that seem right to you?
No, it's well before that.
It's well before that. Okay. Did you say they got to the 14th? Did they?
That's what they told me. Yeah.
Did they effect a rescue there?
There was no rescue they could. They only poked their head into the 14th. It was too hot. They were melting, they said. Right. And that's when they came back and told me that it's just far, far too hot for them to go without water to effect that rescue. So the tactic at that point was then to push and try and calm the 11th down. We were never going to put it all out. We needed to get to a point where it just made conditions better to push crews higher.
Who was doing the debriefing when crews came down? Obviously you were. What about Richard Welch? Was he taking debriefs as well?
Yes, and Louisa De Silva and Brian O'Keefe around the entry control board.
Did you all confer about particular debriefs so that you each knew what every debrief involved?
I wouldn't say every debrief, but certainly as debriefs came, we were conferring, certainly myself and Richard Welch, around tactics and progression.
Right.
How was the plan working? How far were we pushing crews? What were the conditions against the FSGs, and how far we could really push them? But you know, in between that time, you know, you had various systems going on the ground floor. I had a firefighter rehab bit round the corner because firefighters were coming down and collapsing with exhaustion. We were trying to look after them, and we had a casualty handling area on the other side where we were taking casualties out.
So that's the 14th. Looking at the 16th, you say you sent crews to the 16th floor. Do you remember when you deployed an EDBA crew? I'm assuming you mean an EDBA crew to the 16th floor.
No, but it was coming towards my period in command when because we'd encountered a number of problems as well during that part. So Grenfell wasn't a wet riser, it was a dry riser, which meant we had to connect our hoses to externally into the dry riser inlet during a period of the night where the debris had fallen off. It chopped the hose in half, which meant that we lost the delivery hose, internal delivery hose, which meant we lost water to the building. It meant I had to, myself and Richard and Andy Wharton had to deploy crews underneath where the debris was falling to fix the hose to get the water pressure back on. During another period on the 11th floor, one of the 70mm water jets burst. So we had water under pressure punching down the stairwell as you had those crews punching up. What it meant, and you know, to their credit, they wanted to push on. At some point I had to stop them. because we were desperate to get the FSGs, really desperate to get them. But what happened was the crews were getting soaked with water because of the jet as they were going up the stairs, and then going into a fire compartment and getting boiled. And they were still trying to push through to do that. And in the end, we just had to fix that water because they were just getting punished.
Just to go back to my question, do you remember when you deployed an EDBA crew to the 16th floor?
No, I can't remember the time, I'm sorry.
Okay, and the same question for the 18th floor. Do you have any recollection of
No, I don't think I ever got, in my command, I don't think I ever got to the 18th floor.
No, okay. So can we take it that 14th was the upper limit of the floors to which you actually sent EDBA crews?
Yeah, for a
deployed
period,
EDBA
yes,
crews?
because of the conditions that were first at the 9th and certainly then pushing the 10th and the 11th.
Right.
The 11th was particularly the one where crews were saying it was just too bad.
Now, can I just ask you to be shown a picture, which is MET 005774. This is a picture of the wall in the lobby on the ground floor. It says at the top, above 10 EDBA, below 10 SDBA. And Pete Wolfenden has told us that he wrote that up there. Do you have a recollection of a discussion about the 10th floor being the boundary between SDBA and EDBA deployment?
Yes.
When was that discussion with Pete Wolfenden?
No, I didn't have that discussion
Sorry.
with Pete Wolfenden.
Who was it? Sorry, let me take it in stages. First of all, who did you have the discussion with?
Spoke to Richard and had this discussion with Nick Kamite, who was looking after the pool of resources, and what he was doing was giving crews, before they got a detailed brief, an overview brief. So by the time they got to me, they had an idea of what the plan was, and Louisa De Silva and Brian, who were taking information as crews were going to them with their floors, and also as they were coming back to be debriefed.
And do you remember where the discussion took place between Pete Wolfenden and Richard Welch about that?
No, I know I spoke to Richard, but I don't know the discussion between Richard and Pete.
Do you remember whether he went into the lobby from the Bridgehead area to speak to Pete Wolfenden about that?
And we were all in the ground floor lobby, so a number of discussions took place through the night in that lobby area where the crews were congregating, so I would have expected they would have spoke there.
Right. Do you remember being party to the discussion about the division between EDBA and SDB wares at the 10th floor?
I can't remember being party to it, but I may have been.
Right. Would you like a break? Is that?
Yeah, I think we'll take.
It's been indicated to me that it might help you.
Yeah, no
Mr.
worries.
Chairman, can we take 5 minutes?
Certainly.
Is that enough time, I should ask you?
Yeah,
Sorry?
that'd be fine. Thanks.
Is 5 minutes enough?
Yeah.
Well, look, we'll say till 5 to 4,
Thank you.
which is a bit more than 5 minutes, and to anyone else who actually begins. Right. Thank you. Go with the usher, please. Just a minute, before I leave you, how are you getting on?
Sorry, no, fine. We will finish by 4:30. Come on.
Yes.
We have to finish by 4:30.
Well, if it turns out that you're not ready by 5 to 4, it would be good if you could send the usher with a message.
Yes, and I apologise for
Otherwise, the
keeping you out.
witness is sitting there wondering what's going on.
Yes, no, quite right. Quite right. I was distracted, rather.
That's right, don't worry. 5 to 4, please. All right, Mr. Goulbourne, you happy to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
You know, if at any other stage you think you need a break, just do indicate. You don't have to wait to be asked.
Thank you.
Right?
Well, thank you for coming back.
Thank you for coming back. Can I just clarify one thing that arises out of some questions I asked you about a deployment to the 14th floor, which was changed. We talked about a deployment to flat 113, which was changed. You said you didn't recall it, I think. If it wasn't you, who else could have made that change?
Richard Welsh could have.
Anybody else?
I wouldn't have expected that unless Louisa or Brian had some information, but they would have checked that off with either myself or Richard first.
Right. And where a change like that would be made, so that a deployment as a result, or instruction to a crew as a result of an FSG call, let's say above the 11th floor, was changed so that it would no longer happen, and you held the chit, as it were. Why was that not communicated back to the guys handling the FSG at the wall and then back to eventually the control room so that the call handlers would know?
I don't recall someone's brief being changed, so, you know,
Right.
I know we had a system in place, we had EDBA crews and SDBA crews, and they were being deployed by myself or Richard.
Now, going back to this question of the 10th floor being the boundary between the SDBA and EDBA deployments, was this around the same time as what we've called, perhaps unfortunately now, the heated or passionate discussion between or with watch managers Williams and station manager Wolfenden about deployment? Or was it a separate occasion?
No, it was just part of the tactical plan. It was to enable a focus on specific areas, and just to enable simultaneous working. So we needed to plan to certainly work on the floors below the 10th that were still alight, that were still causing us some issues, because don't forget, every time you went through the single door from the stairwell into the lobby, you then compromised the stairwell with smoke. So we still had work going on in there, but still were pushing hard to certainly focus on those exceptionally bad floors to enable progress to upper floors. Knowing that we'd, you know, in the earlier part of the incident, we'd had firefighters up to the top, but now conditions were just so poor that we needed to do some focused work on floors to enable progression.
Do you remember any of the officers managing the FSG calls, by this time Wolfenden and Williams, expressing any concerns about the decision only to deploy EDB wearers above the 10th floor?
No.
You don't? Once you'd made the decision only to deploy EDB wearers above the 10th floor, were crews continuing to present at the bridgehead carrying chits of specific FSG information for calls above the 10th floor?
I don't recall crews presenting with chits. The sheets of paper that were coming from FSGs were being passed directly to the entry control. The crews were then getting their briefs, so from myself or Richard to the floor they were going to, and then they were getting the FSGs that were on that floor from entry control. At that point, it may be that Louisa or Brian gave them the sheet of paper in case they wanted to carry it, but they were getting briefs as well.
Right. Because I thought we'd come to a position where, at the beginning, when the bridgehead was on the ground floor, crews were coming into the bridgehead control with chits of paper with FSG calls on them.
Very early, so very early in that point, but that's the point where myself and Richard stopped FSGs deploying crews by themselves.
Right. So very early. Let me take a question arising out of that. Can I ask you please to be shown LFB quadruple 01929. These are chits of paper which bear, most of them bear Pete Wolfenden's handwriting, all but two. The two are the middle ones on the top. And some of them are marked 410, 430, 420, 410, 405. And they are all, well, you can see the floors. Some of them are for the 14th floor. Do you remember seeing these?
That piece of paper, no.
Watch Manager O'Keefe gave evidence that he had found these in his tunic at the end of the night and handed them to the LFB after the incident. Do you remember yourself seeing Watch Manager O'Keefe receiving chits like this from Pete Wolfenden or anybody else coming from the wall?
No.
You don't?
Sorry, no.
Does it surprise you to see these?
No, I'm not surprised. If FSGs are getting information, it may be that he wrote those information down and time-stamped it.
Right.
What I wouldn't be sure is what activity occurred on the basis of what those pieces of paper were,
right.
Especially if Brian found them in his pocket.
Right. If that evidence is right, and obviously we'll have to consider it, but if that's right, it does show that chits of paper were coming from the wall and being given to the bridgehead as late as 4:30 with FSGs above the 11th floor. My question is really, first of all, whether you knew about that, and I think you've said no. So my next question is, well, who would know about it if not you?
Sorry, I thought the question was, did I know about this specific sheet of paper? Which no. I don't. There was a number of bits of paper that were passed, right. But I wouldn't know each specific one. But I certainly know that the FSGs were passing sheets of paper to entry control. So that's entirely correct.
Right. Okay. And then what were you doing with the FSGs, such as the one we see second from the left, flats 111 through to 115 on the 14th floor? What allocations of EDBA or SDBA were you making as a result of receiving that information?
It depends on, so if that was at 410, I really can't recall at what stage we were in terms of the firefighting operation and how far we could get.
Right.
So if it was at the period of the night where we were unable to push those crews past the 11th, then we would have held those FSGs waiting to ensure that we were able to push those crews by knocking back the fire on the 11th.
Right.
If it was further on where I was asking certain crews to push on, then they would have been allocated, those who we allocated the 14th floor, they would have been given that information by Brian or Louisa and pushed on if I'd allocated a right. crew to the 14th floor.
Right. But I think did you know in general terms that this system was operating, that Pete Wolfenden was continuing to bring chits in with FSG information written on them for higher floors and giving them to the bridgehead to action? Yeah,
we never stopped trying to receive the information
right.
from FSG.
Right.
That particular sheet of paper looks like an overall summary of some of the information they've got rather than some single pieces of paper which were I've got an FSG on etc. floor. So I would be shocked if we would have sent. I certainly wouldn't have expected or would have wanted to send a crew with a sheet of paper that details the 11th, the 12th, the 14th and the 15th and the 10th on it. That we just wouldn't deploy a crew in that way. That's too much work.
So, and if you don't remember, obviously you'll say so, but what would you or did you do at the bridgehead in response to that? I think you said you would have held the chit back. What would have happened to the information?
Right, so, knowing that was, and I'm not too sure of the timing, but if it was the 11th floor, I would have deployed, which I did, crews the 11th floor, and said to the EDBA crew, you're going to go to the 11th. There's a firefighting jet. I think at that point, when we was at the 11th, there was a firefighting jet coming from the 9th. I would have told them that there's SDBA crews protecting your access and egress, but you've still got serious fire below you. And then they would have gone to Louisa, and Louisa or Brian would have gone, and you've got an FSG in flat 81, 82, 83 and 84.
Now, in terms of floors, we've got Station Manager Wolfenden's evidence that he spoke to Group Manager Welch, as a result of which Group Manager Welch told him that he would try to get to, or possibly above, the 15th floor. My question is, do you recall any such discussion yourself?
No, it depends what time of the night. So very early on in the night when we felt we could make progress because the fire wasn't extensive, we were pushing on as high as we could. and certainly there was talks of 15th, 16th floor, but the information we then got back from crews is the conditions have just deteriorated, it's just too difficult. So it's just around the timing of that.
Right. This is a question I should have asked you earlier, but this is a convenient moment to ask it. Earlier on in the night, do you recall a specific discussion earlier on in the night about difficulties or struggling to get above the 15th floor?
No, not specifically the 15th floor, but certainly heard crews who had gone to do rescues, struggling to come back. I can't recall what floor they were from, but certainly crews had really pushed themselves into a place of difficulty and were struggling to come back to a place of safety.
Certainly. Going back then, earlier in the night to the time when you first arrived at the bridgehead when it was on the 3rd floor, do you remember any discussion about crews struggling to get above the 15th floor at that stage, so from 2:20 or so?
Sorry, not specifically the 15th, but I do remember a crew coming back, and I thought they came back from a higher floor, maybe the 20th, who were saying that they pretty much ran and jumped and fell back to the floors. They didn't think they was going to make it.
Okay. But specifically, I'm asking specifically about the 15th floor at that early point.
The 15th floor, as a specific floor, then no, sorry.
Right. Then moving forward in time then, can I show you a photograph, MET *000 5776. Now, this is a photograph of the main lobby wall. And it's not that easy to see, but we can magnify it. Underneath the yellow wires, just by the door jamb, we can see that somebody has written 0430, no one above 15th. Does that help you recall any kind of discussion about not deploying crews above the 15th floor?
I don't recall having that discussion specifically about the 15th floor, but certainly recall having discussions about the difficulties and the fire spread on the 11th and upwards. 11th
and upwards, right. Okay. Pete Wolfenden said that he wrote that up there at about 4:30, no one above 15th, but I think you say you don't remember any discussion about that at that time. All right. Do you remember any discussion that Station Manager Myatt had with you about that subject? Or any floor in particular at about this time?
Sorry, no. I remember having a number of discussions with Nick, but sorry, I can't remember the content of it.
Right. Can I also ask you then to be shown an exhibit of Station Manager Egan's, which is MET *000 which is 5th exhibit. MET *000
Don't think that's going to work.
Try a different. Let's try. This is a different reference. MET *000 Now, this is a whiteboard from CU7, which records, if you see in the black writing on the right-hand side of the whiteboard, from SM Wolfenden at 0425, BA crews committed to 15th floor, and then at 0445, BA crews only committed up to 11th floor, not 15th. First of all, at 0425, do you remember a discussion either with Pete Wolfenden or Richard Welch about not committing, or about committing crews to the 15th floor, as recorded there?
No, but that seems that the measures at 0445 is a clarification of the one at 0425, which would confirm the 11th floor issue that we were having.
Is that your reading of that now, or is that a recollection of what happened?
No, that would be my
overnight?
reading of that
Right,
now.
okay. But, so looking at those two pieces of data, does that help us time the decision whereby crews were limited only to going to the 11th floor?
Yeah, the timing indicates the difficulties that we were faced on what floors they were.
Right. And was that before or after, do you think, the decision was made only to commit EDBA crews above the 10th floor, as recorded on the wall that we saw earlier?
I would say that was probably afterwards, because we were focusing SDBA below 10th for
Right.
protection.
Do you have any recollection of Station Manager Egan coming to speak to you when the bridgehead was on the ground floor?
I don't remember speaking to Dan Egan all night.
Do you know Danny?
I know Dan Egan.
He gave evidence, and he said that there was a discussion between him, you and Group Manager Welch, in which he expressed concern, and I'm summarising his evidence, that too much focus was being put on putting the fire out and not enough on getting people out of the building. That was his recollection. Do you recall that?
I don't remember seeing Station Manager Egan all night.
Okay. Did you talk to him at all during the night?
I don't remember seeing him all night.
No, you didn't see him, but did you talk to him?
If I saw him, would I talk to him?
No, let me try this a slightly different way. Did you speak to Station Manager Egan by radio at any point during the night?
No, I didn't speak to him at all. Sorry.
Okay.
And that's I don't remember speaking to him through the night. So.
Okay. Now, let me turn to a different topic. Stay put. In your supplemental statement on page 3, in the second paragraph, you say that you were aware that Andy Rowe had changed the stay put policy. It's the second paragraph, you see that? And you say the conditions within the building forced that change, and at that point I'd already begun systematic searching due to the sheer volume of people. Do you remember roughly, at least, what time you learnt that Andy Rowe had changed the stay put policy?
Sorry, no, I don't.
Okay. Do you think it was pressing that? Was it before or after the bridgehead came down to the ground floor that you learnt that he'd changed the stay put policy?
It wouldn't have been when I was on the bridgehead on the 3rd floor, so it would have taken place when I was on the ground floor, but I really couldn't give a definitive time. I saw the AC, Andy O'Loughlin and Andy Rowe periodically through the night, and so did Richard, and we were passing information over our plan and the tactics, and also theirs, so, but I couldn't honestly tell you what time that was.
No. So you think you learnt about the change in stay put advice when you were on the ground floor?
Yes.
Do you remember or know when Andy Rowe actually changed that advice or authorised the change of that advice?
The exact time,
Yeah.
sorry, no.
Right. Do you know if anybody on the bridgehead was consulted by Andy Rowe or anybody else about the decision to change the stay put advice?
Yeah, potentially, but I really can't remember. I know that there was so much information coming in, but it could have been communicated. I may have missed it. I just really can't remember.
Now, Mr. Welch says in his supplemental statement, and I don't need to take you to this, it's page 9. He says that he thought he became aware of the change to the stay put advice around 8 a.m. Do you remember anything happening around that time which would trigger a recollection about a change in the stay put advice in your mind?
No, I was focused on other things at that time. I knew I still had a rescue to take place. if I recall, I remember us being really focused that we still had a casualty on the 10th and the 11th, and I was deploying crews to go and get those two.
Okay. Where were you at about 8 a.m.?
Still in the lobby,
Still in the lobby, at the bridgehead.
at the bridgehead.
Where was he at 8 a.m.?
Richard
Welch.
in the lobby.
At the bridgehead.
Yeah, or around that area on the ground floor. He could have been standing
Right.
on the other side by the crews or Nick Meyer or their FSGs, but he was certainly on the ground floor.
Right, okay. But you don't remember him receiving that information at about 8 a.m.?
Sorry, no.
Right. Did the change in stay put advice, as you recall it happening, result in any change to the tactics or strategy being deployed, being used at the bridgehead?
No, we were at systematic searching at that point because we were dictated by the fire of how far we could go.
Right. Slightly different topic. Can I ask you to look at the short incident log, please? At page 22. And I want you to look at the time mark of 02:17:36. You'll see there that at 02:38, I apologise, 02:38:21, you can see that a dangerous structure engineer was the subject of a service request. Do you remember that?
Yes, remember we had a discussion and requested the IC, but I think the IC had already called for a dangerous structure engineer. We were worried about the stability of the building.
Right. And in fact, if you look across to page 22, which I think is where I wanted to start, we see, I think, the first request for that at 02:17:36, which is a message from CU8, request dangerous structure engineer. Now, at that point, were you aware that a DSE had been called for? Do you recall that?
Yes, there was some discussion. I can't recall whether it was exactly that time, but we certainly called for a DSE. That's normal practice.
Yeah.
We had some real concerns that the building had potential to collapse.
Now, you, I think, had only just arrived at this stage, so this would be around about the same time as your arrival. Do you remember actually having any discussion with anybody at that time about the need to call a DSE?
No, I certainly had that discussion on the bridgehead, though.
Right. Do you know why, given that a DSE had been called for because of those concerns at 02:17:36, stay put advice was still being given to those in the building?
No, calling the DSE is normal practice if you're worried about and concerned about building stability. It doesn't potentially mean it's going to collapse. You want an assessment to be able to make a decision about what your tactical plan is going forward.
Right.
We knew we had a severe fire, and obviously I doubt if I would have been privy to that conversation at that point, but certainly later on in the incident, we was concerned about how stable the building was.
Would it be in accordance with policy or normal practice to continue to give callers stay put advice while at the same time calling for a dangerous structures engineer because of the concerns you've identified?
Yeah, it could be, and a lot of it depends on what you think and what part do you think is subject to collapse. We call a dangerous structure engineer not because sometimes of partial collapse. It may be that we've got a concern about other structures. It may be a walkway that might affect the operations that might collapse. It might be something to do with part of the building that may deliver a partial collapse. So generally, it doesn't always mean that it's grave. You just want an assessment because of concerns.
Would the fact that you had concerns which led to a DSE being called not prompt you at least to consider the wisdom of continuing to give stay put advice to callers?
I think there would have been something for the IC to consider, but it depends on what they called the DSE for in terms of collapse at that point. Right. I know what we called the DSE for later on in the incident because we were concerned that the building was not in grave danger, but we were just concerned that it there was potential for collapse, but we had to make a decision about whether we were going to stay and carry on. And we made a decision between us that it was still a person's reported fire, it was still FSGs. We were those people's last hope, and if it was bad, it was bad, but we had to carry on trying to rescue them.
In general terms, Mr. Goulbourne, did there come a point when it was obvious to you that rescue from the top floors of the tower, the higher floors of the tower, would be impossible?
No, we never gave up hope at all, not throughout the whole of that operation. People do miraculous things in incidents, and there was always a view that there could be someone in a void, there could be someone hiding somewhere, and we were there hoping we weren't going to give up, not a chance.
Did there ever come a point when you thought that evacuation was the only option?
No, well, I always thought we were going to commit and get crews up to rescue people. And again, I probably just need to quantify that, detailing how difficult evacuation was. The conditions in the stairwell were really, really difficult. If I deployed, as I would, multiple firefighters on multiple floors into that, and then the elements of that combustion were in that stairwell, which they were, I had firefighters working for long periods of time just on their bellies because they couldn't stand up. You wouldn't have been able to evacuate people in those conditions. You would have evacuated them to their death. It would have made the operation fail.
I've just got one more question, which is to go back to something you said this morning when we first started talking about compartmentation and cladding. And it was in the context of my questions about training and the fire in a high-rise in France. And you said we hadn't really talked about what happens when it starts breaching each compartment up, because I'm perfectly honest, that's something I don't think I've ever seen and didn't expect. It's a clarificatory question. Do you mean that you'd never seen and didn't expect a fire travelling up the facade of a building? Or do you mean you didn't expect it to breach back into a particular compartments?
Yeah, we've seen fires travel up facades for a number of reasons. The most common one is balconies, external balconies. We've just had probably the hottest summer we've had in a long while. Someone has a barbecue on an open balcony, and sometimes you get fire spread quite rapidly, and I think we've recently seen a fire in Camden that did exactly that. But to breach the compartmentation on multiple floors going that way, I've never seen anything like that in my life.
When you say going that way, do you mean from the outside to the inside?
Yeah.
You've never seen that before?
No.
That's what you meant, is it?
Yeah. We've all been to fires that have breached compartmentation, potentially on one floor. It's come out of a flat into a lobby, or it's come out of a flat into a communal airway or a stairwell. But even on multiple floors, you would expect at some point the compartmentation should do what it does. You don't expect multiple failures on multiple floors. It's something that I hope I'll never see again, if I'm honest.
No. Mr. Goulbourne, thank you very much. I'll be delighted to know those are all the questions I have, subject to anything which might potentially emerge. Mr. Chairman, I am, as it were, completed at 4:25, let it be noted. In the usual way, there may be one or two questions that occur.
Yes, well,
So
you'd like 5 minutes just to check that.
Less than 5 minutes, so I can let the witness go at 4:30 as I promised.
Mr. Goulbourne, it sometimes happens that council need time to check they haven't got any other questions and so on. So I'm going to rise now. Perhaps you also leave the room. Don't talk to anyone about your evidence, of course. And we'll get you back in no later than 4:30.
Thank you.
All right? And then there might be some more questions, but I have to see then. All right. Thank you very much. Right. 4:30 already.
Here.
Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes. First of all, Mr. Chairman, by saying what I said about there only being 5 minutes, I didn't mean to stop people asking me to ask questions. It may have had that chilling effect. I hope it hadn't.
Well, I think I made it clear to you that if you need more time,
Yes. Yeah. But I don't think it has
by
had
extension, if other people need more time,
Quite so. But I hope it
just need to let me know.
I hope it didn't have a silencing effect. That's the last thing I would want to achieve. So let me make that clear. There are two more questions I have, so I can get the witness back,
Right.
please.
Shall we have Mr. Goulbourne back then, please? Thank you, Mr. Goulbourne. I think there are a few more questions.
Okay, thank you.
They're very short. It's really to follow up on two things, really. You said at the end of your evidence that you never gave up hope. Does that apply to, I know this is difficult to answer, but does that apply to those who are calling from floors above floor 11, floor 14, 16, 18?
Yeah, we were never ever going to stop trying to reach them.
Right.
So, you know, to a man and woman on every single crew that certainly were working under our command at that point, we were still keen to keep on trying. Even when the FSG calls went quiet, we kept on going.
Given the conditions that you've described, as were being reported to you by returning EDBA crews in the debriefs, white hot, huge amounts of heat and smoke, what did you think was going to happen on those higher floors to allow you later to reach the callers there?
We were going to make the conditions better by tackling the fire on each of the floors that were obviously feeding the difficult floors. Once we got it to a stage, I'd never say we got that under control, but it would get to a point where it was bearable. We would have just pushed on. Certainly as a commander, I went up to the 9th and the 11th to check how bad it was for the crews, and I was certainly on my belly. There were terrible conditions, but we had to keep on going. And that's what those crews, especially all those BA crews did. They kept on trying to get to the point of making conditions bearable to push on further.
But in reality, given the conditions that you yourself observed on those higher floors, how could you in reality have had any real hope that you would be able eventually to send crews to rescue people effectively?
In my 20 years in the fire service, I've seen people survive all sorts, and you'd be surprised that if you give up hope, suddenly that you find them tucked away. Crews rescue people in fridges and cupboards and all sorts of places that they find survivable. We will not stop until we've searched every single room, every single cupboard, every single door, until we're satisfied that we've got everybody. And that would have been the only time we would have stopped.
And what level of personal risk were crews exposed to by virtue of the deployment to those higher floors?
We're still shocked that we brought everyone home. I think we were preparing for firefighters to die.
So shocked in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd made a decision very early that we were going to push on trying to rescue people despite concerns certainly later on about the stability of the building. And that was going back to my point that we were not going to give up hope. Certainly myself and Richard had that conversation. And firefighters deal in just facts. And at some point, once you make a decision, you move the emotion out of the way, and the facts are that those people were relying on us. We take our responsibility really seriously. It's an honour to protect your city, and if it's an honour to protect your city, you're not going to give that up. It's painful that we've lost 72 people that evening, but we were never going to give up on them.
No. Mr. Goulbourne, that's very clear, and we're very grateful for that explanation. And those are all the questions I have. And
Thank you.
I want to say thank you very much for coming to us and assisting us with our investigations. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd certainly add my thanks to that. It's really helpful to us to hear your account of what you were doing during the night in question, and we're very grateful to you for coming, and I'm sorry if it's been a distressing
No, it's fine.
and difficult experience.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you very much indeed. You're free to go now, and if you'd like to go with the ushers, she'll look after you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Well now, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, I want to say just one or two things about the timetable, if I may.
Yes.
There has been a little bit of behind-the-scenes work. We've published the timetable for tomorrow. I know that you've been very kind in allowing me a 9:30 start as a result of me asking you, because we've got quite a long day.
Yes, I should apologise to everyone else in the room for that.
Well, I
shouldn't
should too, I know. It wasn't easy. But we've published the timetable for tomorrow and for Monday. We're calling 4 witnesses from the control room and 1 witness from the control room of Northwest Fire Service. We had provisionally indicated that we were going to be calling Sharon Lancaster from Essex Fire and Rescue Service, but we are unable to call her tomorrow or Monday because of the timetabling. We are going to call her on another day soon. So I want to give that assurance. We do want to call her. It is our intention to do so. The difficulty is just fitting her in along with the other control room officers tomorrow and Monday. It's just no room in the timetable for it because there are some important questions we want to cover with her. So I'm sorry about that, but we will be calling her as soon as we can. So that means that for tomorrow the order is Alexandra Norman and Peter Duddy, and for Monday it's Debbie Rial, Aisha Jabin and Angie Gotts.
Yes, good. Well, thank you very much. So we'll break now and start at 9:30
Most grateful.
tomorrow.
I should also just say there's going to be a fire alarm test in 8 minutes' time, and so I don't want people to be distressed about what that is. It's the usual Wednesday 4:45 test, but since we're just a little bit after the 4:30
Yes.
mark, I should just mention that.
Thank you for reminding everybody. Yes, thank you. 9:30 tomorrow then, please. Thank you very much.